Well, I think of myself as an upbeat person, but let's face it, some days you just got to admit having MS really stinks. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam, and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for nearly 38 years. And every time I see something interesting or read something interesting, I want to share it with you all because I just like to do that and I love your comments back. I think we can all learn from each other and support each other. Having MS is not that much fun most of the time, let's face it. But, there's always the pleasure of making new friends and learning new things as we share what we learn together. Today I wanted to talk about a YouTube channel that I've been following for quite some time. It's called This Mainer Mom. And the woman who makes the videos, Karen, has all kinds of good information about decluttering and household sorts of things. I enjoy watching her videos. The one, though, that I just saw today was very interesting to me because she gives 10 reasons why obesity sucks. She is on a weight loss program, and she's lost quite a bit of weight already, so she's well on her way, but still would be considered obese, and she just goes through the 10 reasons why that really stinks. And as I was watching her video, I realized that many of the things that she talks about have a corollary. If they don't exactly match MS, they have a corollary with MS. So I thought I would just go through her 10 reasons and say how I see it from an MS perspective. So here we go. Number 10, going to the doctor. Okay, I think all of you can relate with this one. It's just not fun to go to the doctor. And I'm not even going to talk about all the rigmarole involved in getting there. But it's just not fun to go to the doctor usually. Now, if you have a good relationship with your doctor, and I do, then it's a little less horrible. But still, the whole process is unpleasant, uncomfortable, and you're always reminded of the fact that you have a disability, that you have multiple sclerosis. There's no getting around it. She talks about things like the paper Johnny, she calls them, the pants and stuff they want you to put on. They usually don't fit her. I struggle with them, not because they don't fit, but just because I'm a klutz, and I hate it when they leave me alone to get into these silly little paper doilies that they give you to put on, because I'm so klutzy. It takes me forever to figure out how to do it. And you don't really feel very attractive anyway when you have multiple sclerosis. Sometimes it's just one more thing to make you feel less than attractive as a human being. So maybe not the very worst experience or part of having MS, but certainly I can relate with the kinds of things that Karen talks about. Well, number 9. Number 9 is actually a pretty interesting one. She talks about the paranoia of eating in public. And you can understand why that might be. Perhaps you've been guilty of this yourself. You see somebody that's overweight and they're eating at a potluck or at a friend's house or whatever, and they've either filled their plate or they're eating something like a cupcake that, has a lot of calories. It must run through many people's minds that, oh, well, no wonder she's overweight. She's eating all that. And it may not be the case at all. So it's just an idea that we need to be we need to show a little more grace to each other in this. But as far as multiple sclerosis, how I related to that topic was that I do have a paranoia of eating in public, partly because I'm such a klutz. And as I have troubles, as I've said before, with numbness in my fingers, things like cutting food and that sort of thing, just not easy for me. And I also periodically have bouts of, I guess I would call that unsynchronized swallowing, which makes me kind of cough and choke and all this sort of stuff. And if I'm doing that at home, it's bad enough. But if I'm doing it out in public, it's humiliating. I really don't like it. So, yes, I totally understand where she's coming from when she says eating in public. She's just kind of worried and paranoid about it, would rather not do it. Another one that has to do with going out in public is she talks about feeling uncomfortable when she goes to other people's houses. And because of her weight, she is very particular about where she sits, not because, of comfort so much, although there is a factor involved in that. But when an overweight person gets situated, they have to make sure they don't get boxed into a corner or something, because trying to get out to use the restroom or to get something or whatever can be a real hassle. She describes that quite eloquently, actually, and I'll link her video below so you can watch it. But I was thinking I can relate to this because I feel with my lack of coordination, my lack of balance, I am not comfortable being in a situation where, say, I'm at the end of a row and I'm not able to just easily get up and leave my chair if I need to use the bathroom or whatever I might need to do. For the same reason, she talks about, well, there's no way you're going to squeeze past people. I would say the same is true for me. I do not like to have to work with small spaces and be concerned about, am I going to fall over some poor person that I'm going to injure? And certainly it would be embarrassing if nothing else. I don't really want to have to do that. So when I come to a place, I like to be there early so I can get a good seat. And good for me means a seat that I can get out of easily, and that I can get out and go elsewhere if I need to without asking other people to please make space for me. To please make space for me. And I think perhaps you can relate to that. The other part of that, by the way, is that if you have any kind of assistive device, be it a cane or a walker, where do you put it, right? You come into church or whatever, and you don't need that when you're there. You could sit in the chair, but now you have this cane or this walking stick or this walker or what have you. You got to find a place for it, and it's certainly not going to be easy to do if you find that you're in a relatively small space. Again, I try to get there early so that I can scope all that out ahead of time and make as little fuss as I possibly can. Number 7, she talks about how she doesn't like carpooling to events. And part of that is finding a spot in the carpool vehicle, be it a van or bus or what have you, that is easy for her to get in and out of. And I would say, I'm going to say it's pretty much the same thing as I was just talking about for those of us with multiple sclerosis. Even if we are still ambulatory, we are not necessarily going to want to fit ourselves into tight spaces or be crammed way into the back. I have friends right now who give us rides to Bible study, and we end up sitting in the very back because that's the practical place for us to be. But in order to do that, I have to climb over something that I really don't want to have to trip over without going into detail. But I don't really want to trip over that. And yet I'm constantly aware that that is a real possibility. So do I really look forward to that? No, not so much. And it's too bad because I enjoy being with my friends and I enjoy the activity to which we are carpooling. But I have to say, I'm not that comfortable yet getting in and out of the spot that I realize is the best for me to sit in. Maybe over time I'll learn how to move and where to go and it'll be easier. But right now, kind of difficult. So I really can't understand where she's coming from there. Number 6, she talks about plus size clothes, that they're just not very appealing and they're hard to find. Well, okay, I don't have that problem exactly. I am tall, so I understand about how difficult it can be to find pants that are long enough or shirts with their sleeves are long enough. And, there is all that. But I think for me, the main problem is a lot of the styles are not easy for me to manage as a person with multiple sclerosis. I will tell you, I was really thrilled this fall. For some reason, snaps seem to have come back. Snaps on flannel shirts, snaps on fleece. I'm really happy with that because, as I've said in other videos, little buttons and me, we just don't get along anymore. So I do appreciate what she's saying there, that it's just difficult. It's frustrating to go shopping and not be able to find something that will work for you. And I have really become appreciative of online shopping, though as she says, it's hard to shop online sometimes and know what you're really getting. But I think unfortunately for me, I've had to make virtue of necessity and get a lot of my stuff online because I just do not have the wherewithal to keep trying on all different clothes until I find something that A, I like, and B, works for me. Then I would love to know if that's a problem that you have as well, and maybe how you've solved it. Number 5, she talks about the price of clothes. She says because she's plus size, she ends up having to spend more money to buy clothes that wear out just as fast as the regular size clothing. And I don't know that I have as much to say on that one, but what it did make me think about was the price of various accommodations. And I know as we go up the line, they become more expensive. And by up the line, I mean if you need a cane, those are pretty readily available and they're not terribly expensive. But the further you go, if you need a rollator or you need a wheelchair, they get more and more expensive as you go up the line of needing more things. And I resent that sometimes. I feel like it's not my fault that I need these things. It's not any of our faults, but we end up having to pay the price. And insurance may or may not cover the cost, or at least enough of the cost where it's not prohibitively expensive. And I know that for many of us, it's not that simple of a matter to just go out and buy something that costs several $100s or more, depending on what it is. So I do get that. I can relate to what she's saying from that perspective. Not so much clothes, but certainly the accommodations that we with multiple sclerosis find that we absolutely need to depend on at some point. And here's another one. She talks about her next on her list, she talks about airline travel. And I have to say, I hate it so much. I haven't been on a plane in years. And that may limit me in some ways. It makes things take a little longer. But again, I've made virtue of necessity because, sort of like she was talking about earlier, I just find it difficult to get to my seat in the first place. The aisles are very narrow, and you feel like you're hitting into people. Number one, if you lose your balance, you're going to make a total spectacle of yourself. And I don't really want to do that. And then even getting into the seat and all that, yeah, as she said, I've learned that as much as I like the window seat, I'd better stick with the aisle because if I need to get up, I don't want to have to be figuring out how I'm going to squeeze out of that tiny space. And then I go through periods, and thankfully I haven't had them in a while. But years ago, air travel was really difficult for me because of motion sickness. And I tried various things to keep myself from feeling nauseated. I didn't want to have to use the airline sickness bag. Thankfully, I never did quite get there, but sometimes I felt really pretty lousy. But one thing I found that did work for me was those C-bands that you wear on your wrist. It has a little button that you put right over a certain place right on your wrist between the veins and the tendons there. And that pressure just seemed to make a world of difference in my ability to go on a long plane ride without being sick. But again, you have to think it all through and find something that will work for you. I did a scopolamine patch for a while, even, believe it or not, just for the motion sickness, which helped a lot. But then I found that the reaction of my skin with the glue or whatever it is that they're using there, it became pretty unpleasant. So I decided I couldn't use that either. So I'm really glad that I found those C-bands. They work for many situations, not just air travel, I found. But fortunately, I'm in a phase right now where I don't really need them. But again, I can relate with the things that Karen is talking about. It is unpleasant to fly on an airplane. Number 3 for her, she's relating to the one before about airline travel, but she specifically hates asking for seat extenders. And what she talks about here, she's asking for an accommodation. And the way she describes it here is so cute and humorous. I'm just going to put this clip in here because I just think I totally can understand how she feels. But I think that how I can relate to this as someone with multiple sclerosis is I do not like asking for accommodations. As time has gone on and it's become more unavoidable, I've had to learn how to cope with that. I just ask, and it isn't as horrible, I guess, as I made it out to be, but for a long time, I would avoid it, to the point where I probably should have asked because my performance or my ability was somewhat hampered because I did not get an accommodation. I remember the second time I took the law school admission test, after the first one, where I had done extremely well, I'd gotten like the 93rd or 94th percentile. I could have gotten into just about any law school with those credentials. But time lapsed and I had to retake it. And when I did it this time, the room conditions were such that I just really couldn't focus on taking the test. We had those desks that are like in schools where the desk comes up over and all that. And they were back to back, touching each other. So that anytime anyone along the way moved at all, the whole row kind of wiggled or creaked or whatever. And so I was paranoid about moving because I didn't want to disturb anybody else's test taking. And the same was true for all of the stuff that the first time I had been able to spread out my pencils and my eraser and all the things that I needed, my watch. This time, the little desk was so small, I barely had room for my test, let alone all of the other things that I really would have benefited from having closer to hand and not worrying about them rolling off the desk. And I guess, yeah, I spent so much time worrying about all that, that my score, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a lot lower than it was the first time. And I don't think I got stupider in those few years. I think it was just I should have asked for an accommodation and I didn't do it. Her second reason why in her mind obesity sucks is one I can completely relate to as a person with multiple sclerosis. She talks about her own mobility being a reason that it stinks. I almost don't have to say anything else. I think you already could probably see how there's a definite parallel with multiple sclerosis. We get frustrated because we know we used to be able to do things easily and we can't do them now. Whether it's getting up on a step stool or a ladder, whether it's balancing well enough to walk in a relatively narrow space, whatever it might be, or in some cases, whether we can walk the distance that we need to or walk at all. It's a lot different now from the way it used to be, and that is very frustrating. And I don't really have to belabor that one, I think, because we all know what that's all about. So I'm just going to leave it at that. We can totally relate with Karen when she says she gets frustrated with her own mobility and her speed of getting from point A to point B, because we're all in that boat too. And then finally, her number one thing that she hates about being obese is that she has daily battles with energy levels. Hey, here's another one that you can totally relate to, right? Yeah, energy is the currency of our lives now. If we don't have it, you might as well be broke because you can't do anything anyway. And it is hard. And there's no answer for it. Just like with obesity, I suppose, you can look to the future and hope, okay, well, maybe when I've lost the weight that I want to lose, I'm going to be more energetic, etc. But for a lot of us with multiple sclerosis, we don't really have that looking to the future thing where we can say, well, someday I'm going to be better. I think multiple sclerosis is a real lesson in humility and patience and endurance, because there's no magic answer at the end of any rainbow. We're just learning to live with it. But I will say one advantage that I think those of us with MS have over those who are dealing with obesity is that, as Karen says, she deals a lot with shame and guilt. And in many of the situations that she finds herself, she realizes that she's probably being paranoid sometimes, that people aren't judging her as she thinks, but she's still ashamed of her weight. She's ashamed of her body. She's guilty because she feels like this is something that she did to herself, so she has no right to feel like whatever she has no right to. She has no, she just has to live with this guilt. There's nothing, she just knows that she's contributed in some way to her condition. But this is a big difference, I think, for those of us with MS, because given all the research that's gone into the causes of MS and all that, there's still no definitive answer as far as lifestyle choices that we might have made, right? You ate a certain thing, you didn't do a certain thing, you failed to do this certain thing. It's not like smoking cigarettes where the Surgeon General and others have told you that if you smoke a certain number of cigarettes over the course of your life, you're increasing your chances of lung cancer. It's not like that with MS. We have no idea what really causes MS. So we can't feel guilty. And really, what is there to be ashamed of either? Who would look at us and judge us? It's not our fault we have this. So we should not be dealing with guilt and shame. Now, I know that we can have toxic people in our lives that can make us feel guilty and ashamed. And if we do, I strongly suggest that you think about that. If that's a relationship that you are involuntarily, maybe that's a relationship you don't need in your life. If it's one that's maybe a parent or a spouse, someone that you're more emotionally attached to, you might need to just have a talk with them. If they're making you feel guilty or ashamed because you have MS, that is totally not right. And so don't ever internalize any of that. It's not your fault. I think they could research this till the cows come home, and they're not going to find something that, oh, gee, if you only hadn't done this, or if you only hadn't eaten this particular food, or whatever, they're not going to come up with that. It's not your fault, and that's just how it is. So don't make it your problem when it's not your problem. It's someone else's problem to get over, not yours. Well, there you go. There's the 10 reasons why it really stinks to have multiple sclerosis. I know there could be others that weren't on this list, but I just basically decided I'd go with her list and see if I could relate some of what she's talking about to our condition with multiple sclerosis. And I think that there was an awful lot of overlap. It's hard to be different. Let's face it. I think that's the key right there. It's really hard to be different, to feel different, to keep yourself from becoming paranoid, essentially, that people are judging you. And that's maybe why we need each other, to just keep each other encouraged, because there's no need for judgment. We are worthwhile people, and our disability does not change that. So that's really, really the bottom line message here. No shame, no guilt. You're a worthwhile person. So take good care of yourself. And I'm going to see you again in my next video.